At exactly 0347 hours on the morning of February 28, 2026, the Middle East changed forever. No declaration, no final ultimatum, just the sudden, blinding bloom of precision-guided munitions detonating across 17 simultaneous target coordinates in and around Tehran. Operation Epic Fury had begun. The joint U.S.-Israeli strike package, assembled in total secrecy over 6 weeks, was the most concentrated application of air power since Desert Storm. F-35I Adir stealth fighters from the Israeli Air Force crossed Iranian airspace at 40,000 feet, ghost silent, invisible to Iranian S-300 radar networks that had been pre-blinded by a coordinated cyber electromagnetic attack launched from an undisclosed NSA forward node. Before a single Iranian air defense operator could reach for their scramble protocol, Delilah cruise missiles were already threading through the ventilation shafts of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters in Tehran. One of those missiles, a precision-guided penetrator, struck a building near Sadabad Palace. Inside, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, was killed. In the first 9 minutes of the war, Iran lost its head. But what the planners in the Pentagon and IDF war rooms understood, and what the world was about to discover, was that decapitation was only the beginning. Iran had prepared for this moment for decades, dispersing its retaliatory infrastructure across hardened coastal bunkers, mobile missile launchers embedded in civilian neighborhoods, and underground submarine pens along the southern coastline. And at the center of this retaliatory architecture sat the most dangerous 21-mile stretch of water on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. At 4:12 hours on March 1st, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy activated Phase 1 of what internal Iranian doctrine calls the Chokepoint Protocol. In the darkness of the Persian Gulf, IRGC fast attack craft, Kilo-class submarine elements, and pre-positioned sea mines began their synchronized deployment across the northern throat of the strait. Simultaneously, Iranian shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, DF-3 derivatives, and domestically produced Nor missiles were raised to full readiness along the Bandar Abbas coastline. Within 47 minutes of activation, the IRGC's naval component had effectively transformed one of the most critical commercial waterways in human history into a kill zone. A senior IRGC commander broadcast a warning over maritime frequencies in multiple languages. Any vessel attempting to transit the strait did so at the cost of its crew. It was not a bluff. At 0559 hours, the first confirmed attack took place. The U.S.-flagged tanker Stena Imperative, anchored at the port of Bahrain, was struck twice by Iranian-launched anti-ship missiles. The first impact tore through the forward cargo section, igniting a fuel vapor explosion that killed one Bahraini port worker and wounded 2 others. The second impact struck the ship's bridge superstructure. The vessel's crew, trained for hostile maritime environments, activated SOLAS emergency protocols and evacuated within 6 minutes. The ship did not sink, but it burned for 11 hours. The message from Tehran was received loud and clear by every shipping company operating in the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz was closed, and as of that morning, it would remain closed to any vessel linked to the United States, Israel, or their Western allies. Within 72 hours, tanker traffic through the strait collapsed by 70%. Over 150 commercial vessels, supertankers, LNG carriers, container ships dropped anchor in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, their captains refusing to enter a body of water that had become an active war zone. AIS transponder data showed a ghost sea. Ships that had broadcast their positions for years went dark simultaneously. The global energy market went into convulsions. Brent crude punched through $100 per barrel in the first 48 hours. By March 3rd, European natural gas prices had nearly doubled, surging from €30 per megawatt hour to over €60. Qatar's energy minister, standing before cameras with visible unease, warned that if the war continued, Gulf energy producers would be forced to declare force majeure, a statement that sent shockwaves through every financial market on Earth. What you need to understand about the Strait of Hormuz is this. It is not simply a commercial waterway. It is the circulatory system of the global economy. Roughly 20% of all the world's oil and natural gas transits through this 21-mile wide passage every single day. The Gulf states of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, Iraq, and Iran itself depend on it for export revenue. If Hormuz stops, so does the world. Iran had spent 30 years designing a strategy around this single geographic reality, and on the first day of March 2026, they activated it. At 0823 hours on March 2nd, IRGC electronic warfare units deployed windward-confirmed AIS jamming across Emirati, Qatari, Omani, and Iranian territorial waters simultaneously. simultaneously. GPS navigation systems aboard dozens of vessels in the region began returning catastrophically false data, placing ships at inland locations, at airports, at nuclear power plant coordinates, anywhere but their actual positions. For a tanker captain threading through a busy shipping lane, false GPS data is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence. The maritime intelligence firm Windward documented multiple AIS jamming clusters appearing and shifting in real time, a coordinated electronic warfare campaign designed to create chaos without a single missile being fired. Maersk, one of the largest shipping operators in the world, announced it would reroute services entirely away from the region. The Suez Canal, already strained from years of Houthi pressure in the Red Sea, was now the only viable corridor for European energy imports. It was not built for this volume, but the United States Central Command was not watching passively. From the flag bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford, a Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier deploying its full air wing of over 80 aircraft now positioned in the Red Sea, Admiral Christopher Grady oversaw what was already becoming the most complex, multi-domain naval engagement since the Pacific War. The Ford's Combat Direction Center was processing thousands of simultaneous data inputs, radar tracks, electronic intelligence feeds, satellite imagery refreshed every 4 minutes, and Link 16 tactical data network traffic from Allied air defense systems across Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The battle space was enormous. The threat was everywhere. At 11:34 hours on March 3rd, Qatar's integrated air defense system scored a historic first. 2 Iranian Su-24 Fencer strike bombers, flying low and fast at 200 meters above the Persian Gulf, attempted to approach Ras Laffan Industrial City, the beating heart of Qatar's liquefied natural gas production. The Qatari Patriot PAC-3 batteries, networked into a U.S.-managed JTIDS fire control solution, engaged both aircraft simultaneously. 2 missiles were fired. Both found their targets. The Su-24s were destroyed over the Gulf, becoming the first Iranian combat aircraft shot down by a foreign nation since the 1988 tanker wars. Qatar had drawn its own line. The war was no longer bilateral. It was regional. Across the Gulf in the following days, the multi-domain assault intensified. Saudi Arabia's eastern region, home to Aramco's Abqaiq processing facility, the single most important oil installation on the planet, faced wave after wave of Iranian drone swarms. On March 15th alone, Riyadh's Patriot and Tade had layered defense network intercepted 10 drones over the capital and the eastern province. Bahrain reported the destruction of 125 missiles and 203 drones since the conflict began. The UAE's defense forces worked to intercept successive rounds of Iranian missiles and drones. And in Dubai, thick plumes of black smoke rose from near Dubai International Airport as debris from intercepted drones ignited fires that sent thousands of passengers evacuating to lower terminal floors. In Abu Dhabi, a Palestinian civilian was killed when an Iranian missile struck a vehicle near the city outskirts. The Gulf was burning. What's your read on this? Do you believe a naval power like the United States can physically reopen the world's most contested waterway against an entrenched Iranian defensive network? Comment your answer below. The American response came in phases, each more surgical and more devastating than the last. On March 14th, U.S. Central Command authorized the first strikes against Kharg Island, a name that carries enormous strategic weight. Kharg Island, positioned in the northern Persian Gulf, just 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast, is not merely a geographic feature. It is the valve through which 90% of Iran's entire oil export volume passes. Loading terminals, storage tanks, pipeline infrastructure, and IRGC military installations covering every square kilometer of this strategic island. If Kharg stops, Iran's economy stops. President Trump announced the strike in a Truth Social post at 23:17 hours, describing how U.S. forces had totally obliterated every military target on Kharg Island. The island's oil infrastructure was deliberately spared, a calculated act of strategic restraint, weaponized as a warning. If Iran continued blocking the Strait of Hormuz, those oil terminals would be next. It was the most expensive, coercive threat in history. The IRGC's Fars news agency confirmed that more than 15 separate explosions had detonated across the island during the raid. The military infrastructure was gone. The oil terminals stood untouched. For now, at 0317 hours on March 17th, the United States moved to the next phase of kinetic escalation. U.S. aircraft dropped multiple 5,000-pound deep-penetrating munitions, GB-1 Mu-28 hard target penetrators, the so-called bunker busters, on hardened Iranian coastal missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz coastline near Bandar Abbas. These were not standard standard precision strikes. The GBU-28 is a weapon specifically engineered to destroy reinforced concrete structures buried deep underground, the kind of hardened shelters that house Iran's shore-based anti-ship missile batteries. Each weapon weighs over 2 tons, carries a delayed detonation fusée, and can punch through more than 30 meters of earth and concrete before detonating. The message was clear. Nowhere along Iran's coastline was safe from American precision. The subterranean missile launchers that had threatened maritime traffic were being excavated by bombs dropped from 40,000 feet. Simultaneously, the IDF announced it had carried out approximately 7,600 strikes across Iran and more than 11,100 strikes in Lebanon since the operation began. The operational tempo was staggering. At its peak, coalition aircraft were executing hundreds of sorties per day, a rhythm of destruction that Iran's reconstituted air defense network, already degraded by the June 2025 12-day war, struggled desperately to counter. Israeli strikes on Tehran targeted the Sadabad Palace complex, infrastructure linked to Iran's nuclear concealment program, and IRGC headquarters facilities. IDF spokespeople confirmed that Israeli Air Force operations were specifically focused on eliminating Iran's ballistic missile launch capability and destroying regime command nodes to prevent coordinated retaliatory strikes. On the night of March 17th and into the early hours of March 18th, Iran launched what CENTCOM would later classify as a major ballistic missile barrage against Israel. Missiles streaked across the sky over central Israel, visible to civilians across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, as Iron Dome and Arrow 3 interceptors lit the night sky with counterfire. The barrage was not fully defeated. 2 people, a man and a woman, died from serious shrapnel injuries in Ramat Gan, near Tel Aviv, after a missile impact. The Magen David Adom Emergency Response Organization confirmed the casualties. Iran's retaliation, even degraded, was still lethal. The second front had also exploded. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, activated by the death of Khamenei and emboldened by Tehran's explicit orders, began firing barrages of rockets and precision-guided Fate-Late 110 missiles at military installations in northern Israel starting March 2nd. By March 17th, Israeli forces had launched simultaneous strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs and multiple Hezbollah strongholds south of the Litani River. On March 16th, the IDF announced the beginning of limited targeted ground operations in southern Lebanon, pushing into Hezbollah tunnel networks and fortified positions with combined arms teams. Israeli airstrikes had already killed at least 886 people in Lebanon and displaced over 1 million civilians, according to Beirut's Disaster Management Office. Lebanon was being dismantled, front by front, sector by sector, in a campaign that bore uncomfortable similarities to 2006, but with exponentially greater firepower on the Israeli side. In Iraq, the picture was equally combustible. Iran-backed militias of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the so-called Islamic Resistance in Iraq, launched 67 claimed drone and missile attacks on U.S. facilities across the region in the first 3 days of the war, targeting Harir Military Base, Erbil International Airport, and Baghdad area installations. U.S.-Israeli coalition airstrikes responded with targeted strikes on PMF command infrastructure, killing at least 10 combatants. By March 6th, rockets had struck oil installations in Basra, where American companies hold assets, signaling that the militias were climbing the escalation ladder rung by the Liberate Run. Iraq's government announced a partial shutdown of Basra oil production, taking approximately 1.5 million barrels per day off the global market. Kurdistan's 200,000 barrels per day had already been cut off by drone attacks. The financial consequences were cascading across global markets in real time. By March 18th, the full scale of the operational toll had emerged with brutal clarity. The Pentagon confirmed that 13 U.S. military personnel had been killed in action, including 6 who died when a refueling aircraft went down in Iraq, a loss the DoD specified was not caused by hostile or enemy action. CENTCOM confirmed that U.S. and Israeli forces had struck more than 15,000 targets across Iran since February 28. Trump stated publicly that this campaign had achieved a 90% reduction in Iran's ballistic missile launch rate and a 95% reduction in its drone attack volume. Iran's health ministry put the civilian death toll at over 1,200 killed and more than 18,000 wounded, figures that international observers could not independently verify, but that painted a portrait of catastrophic destruction. The UN Refugee Agency estimated that up to 3.2 million Iranians had been displaced, the majority fleeing Tehran and other major cities as the relentless bombing campaign continued. And yet, the Strait of Hormuz remained closed. That was the terrifying paradox at the heart of this conflict. Despite 7,600 Israeli strikes, despite despite 15,000 coalition targets destroyed, despite the decapitation of Iran's supreme leader and the killing of the Basij Force commander Gholamreza Soleimani on March 16, the IRGC's maritime denial apparatus was still functioning. Iranian fast attack craft still lurked in the northern Gulf. Sea mines seated in the shipping lanes remained uncleared. As of March 12, Iranian forces had carried out 21 confirmed attacks on merchant vessels. The Strait, the world's most critical energy artery, was still shut. Trump issued his demand to the world. China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom must send warships to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The response he received from European capitals was cold and sharp. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius stated flatly, "It's not our war. We didn't start it." Germany's Chancellor Merz added that European nations had not been consulted before Operation Epic Fury began, and that Berlin had no intention of joining a military effort at the Strait. Spain, Italy, and France all declined to send ships. NATO's collective posture remained paralyzed by a fundamental disagreement. America had started a war without asking its allies, and now was asking them to bleed for it. China, for its own strategic reasons, also refused. India watched carefully, negotiating with Iran for continued LNG access. A Pakistani oil tanker became the first non-Iranian vessel to transit the strait in weeks, crossing with explicit Iranian permission, a theatrical gesture demonstrating that Tehran intended to manage the chokepoint selectively, rewarding those it chose, and punishing those aligned with Washington. The global economy was absorbing a wound that analysts warned could prove fatal if sustained. Oil had passed $114 per barrel, the highest price since the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Natural gas prices across Europe had doubled from their pre-war baseline. Qatar's energy minister warned that the world's economies would face collapse if Gulf producers were forced to declare force majeure. The UN World Food Programme warned that fertilizer supply disruptions triggered by the conflict would drive global food prices to record levels, threatening food security across the developing world in patterns echoing the 2022 crisis. Analysts projected inflation spirals and recession risk across the G7 if the strait remained sealed beyond 60 days. The military math was becoming clear even to the most hawkish voices in Washington. The United States had destroyed Iran's conventional military capacity to a degree unmatched in modern history. Its aircraft carriers, its superb air wings, its network of precision standoff weapons, and its electronic warfare dominance had performed exactly as designed, but controlling a 21-mile maritime passage ringed with coastal artillery, fast attack craft, semi-submersible mines, and a population willing to fight asymmetrically was a different problem, one that bombs alone could not solve. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, stood before cameras at the Pentagon on March 2nd and said clearly that this was not a single overnight operation and that more U.S. casualties should be expected. That statement, measured and professional, contained within it the terrible admission that the most powerful military machine ever assembled was facing a fight that it could win and still not finish. This is where history will remember March 2026, not as the moment when America broke Iran, but as the moment when the world learned the true cost of building a global economy on a 21-mile bottleneck and then going to war over who controlled it. Every barrel of oil that couldn't pass through Hormuz was a reminder that geography, in the end, is the most durable weapon of all, and Iran had been sitting on its trigger for 40 years. Today's lesson for the world is unambiguous, and it should terrify every government and economist watching this conflict unfold. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is the world's economic heartbeat, and when two nations chose to wage war in its shadow, 8 billion people felt the shockwave. The question that every strategist, every energy minister, and every head of state now faces is not whether the United States can eventually reopen the strait by force. It almost certainly can. The question is what the world looks like economically, diplomatically, and geopolitically on the day it does, because that world will not be the one that existed on February 27, 2026. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never confuse the opening salvo of a war with its ending, because in the Strait of Hormuz, the most dangerous moment may still be ahead. Would you like me to break down the specific Iranian anti-ship missile systems and mine warfare doctrine being used to hold the strait closed?